There's an irritation, not just a fleeting annoyance, not a transient shadow gliding across the day that can be easily brushed off. This is a deep, caustic feeling that creeps under your skin, burrows into the very core of your being, and refuses to leave until it's heard. Recall that prick, that almost physiological spasm when the flawless image of someone's life, a meticulously crafted facade polished to a mirror shine and displayed to the world, elicits not admiration, but an almost instinctive revulsion. Or when someone's ostentatious wisdom, spirituality, or enlightenment seems not inspiring, but frankly hypocritical, causing an acute desire to turn away. We who seek authenticity and depth, those unafraid to gaze into our own abysses, feel this disharmony more acutely than others. We see the cracks in the armor, hear the false notes in the carefully rehearsed symphony of another's existence. And it is here in this sharp, at times unbearable rejection of another's pretense, another's artificiality, that something more profound than mere moral superiority lies. Here lies the key to our own liberation. Allow me to propose a potentially scandalous idea that will overturn conventional perception. What so fiercely repels you in others, their blatant self-confidence bordering on arrogance, their aggressive ambition knowing no bounds, their undisguised craving for recognition at times grotesque, their seemingly shameless, uninhibited creativity or unrestrained, overflowing, vital energy is often merely a distorted, grotesque reflection of a part of you that you once exiled. It is not their vice that you condemn, it is your own. Long-forgotten potential buried under tons of societal disapproval, pulsating in another's body, causing a burning, irreconcilable reaction. Your irritation is not a sign of weakness, nor evidence of pettiness or envy. On the contrary, it is a powerful signal, a beacon piercing the fog of self-deception. It is a compass whose needle trembles, pointing to the precise location of your blocked power, your untamed vital energy, your true creativity, and your capacity for the deepest, unconditional self-acceptance. Every time you feel that prick, that internal burning, know this: it's not just indignation at the external world. It is the cry of your own shadow, not merely longing to be integrated, but demanding to manifest, to assert itself, to reunite with the whole. But why were these qualities so essential for a full, authentic life exiled? Why is what causes such strong repulsion in others the key to our inner treasure, to the very life force we so desperately seek? Why were genuine authenticity, the courage to be vulnerable and open, the right to make mistakes, healthy ambition that drives achievements, or pure, unadulterated creative energy capable of transforming worlds, all those manifestations that could fill life with meaning and boundless power, once banished by us into the darkest, deepest corners of our soul? What invisible stigma was placed on these qualities, making us consider them shameful, dangerous, socially unacceptable, or unworthy of manifestation? What event, what word, what glance, what unspoken prohibition forced us to turn away from ourselves, to sever these living, pulsating parts? It is in seeking the answer to this question, in the journey to the origins of this rejection, to the very scene of the crime where our internal contract with wholeness was broken, that the true map of our inner territory begins to emerge, a territory once fractured, now awaiting reunification. Deep within each of us lives an invisible chronicle, a scroll inscribed with the ink of forgotten lessons and and unspoken words. It is there in these rolled up pages of the past that the true history of the shadow's formation lies. Not as a mystical entity, but as a living archive of everything that was once banished from the light of consciousness. Recall those early years when the world was still an undifferentiated unity and you were a pure, pulsating bundle of energy, knowing no shame or doubt, the embodiment of primordial authenticity. The moment your natural urge for expansion, for expressing yourself in all your fullness, met with the first rejection, the first stone was cast into the well. Perhaps it was a fleeting look of disapproval when your bold creative impulse, your desire to paint the world in your own never before seen colors, was called foolishness or a mess. Or perhaps you first felt a suffocating lump in your throat when your healthy, natural aggression, not malice, but pure boundary setting, the need to assert yourself, to protect your space, was branded as bad manners, selfishness, or excessive pushiness, deserving only of censure. Remember the moment when your sincere, unvarnished ambition, not a lust for power, but a genuine desire to realize your potential, to achieve something significant, to leave your mark, suddenly turned into inappropriate pride, greed, or an unhealthy desire to stand out in the eyes of adults. And of course, let's not forget the right to make mistakes, the vulnerability that makes us alive, not perfect machines. How often was the first blunder, awkward fall, or sincere tear met not with sympathy, but with cold condemnation, biting ridicule, or even worse, icy silence, instilling the belief that being imperfect meant being unworthy of love and acceptance. Each time your spontaneity was shamed, your brilliance dimmed, and your pursuit of truth called naivete, an invisible lock clicked, sealing a part of you in a hidden closet of the soul. These moments, seemingly insignificant, were actually bifurcation points, turning points when the inner compass began to falter. Each such encounter, every hint that you want too much or you are not good enough, was stored deep within the psyche. Those qualities essential for your authentic existence, for a full, unconditional life, for expressing inexhaustible creative energy, for accepting yourself and others in all their imperfections, came to be perceived as dangerous. They were wrapped in shrouds of shame, hidden deep inside to avoid repeated pain, rejection, and isolation. Thus, an internal prison was formed in which your brightest and most powerful aspects were locked away. You learned to be convenient, correct, acceptable, adapting to the expectations of the outside world, cutting off what did not fit into imposed frameworks. And the longer these parts remained in exile, the deeper the conviction took root that they were indeed bad, shameful, or dangerous. This internal amputation, this voluntary renunciation of one's own wholeness, became the invisible price we pay for illusory peace and external approval. It drains vital energy, extinguishes the spark of creativity, and makes genuine self-acceptance impossible as a part of your soul remains in eternal captivity. And as long as this part languishes in oblivion, it will remind you of itself through inexplicable irritation, through a feeling of incompleteness, through the quiet but persistent echo of unfulfilled possibilities. What we call irritation, that sharp pang in the chest at the sight of another's manifestation is not accidental. It is not just a reaction, but an echo of an ancient universal principle deeply rooted in the psyche of each of us. This principle is simple and harsh. What is rejected by us internally will inevitably be encountered by us externally, but in a distorted, alien guise. From the tenderest age, in an effort to be accepted, we learn to cut off parts of ourselves that cause disapproval, be it unbridled joy, spontaneous aggression, daring ambition, or even innocent vulnerability. If these manifestations met with rejection, ridicule, or cold detachment in the eyes of adults, they were exiled, as if from an ancient tribe where survival depended on unanimity. These qualities were banished from the inner circle of our self, deprived of the right to voice and existence. They became pariahs, outcasts, imprisoned in the dungeon of the unconscious, where they were ordered to be silent and not manifest, so as not to disturb the fragile peace of our adapted existence. But energy, once born, does not disappear into nowhere. It merely changes form, like water trapped under pressure in underground springs, seeking an outlet. Each exiled quality is not just a forgotten aspect. It is an unpaid bill, a reminder of blocked potential, of unspent strength that awaits its hour. The more such bills accumulate in the depths of our psyche, the more our vital force is depleted. We spend an enormous, unimaginable amount of energy maintaining these internal barricades, holding rejected aspects in captivity, constantly suppressing their natural urge to manifest. This is like an endless, exhausting struggle with an invisible enemy within, a constant tug of war where on one end is our wholeness and authenticity, and on the other is the fear of being unaccepted and losing illusory security. Hence chronic fatigue, lack of inspiration, the feeling that life is passing us by, and we are merely observing it through thick glass, unable to touch its fullness. This mechanism of projection where we see in another what we cannot or do not want to acknowledge in ourselves has been described in various cultures and eras. In the Gospel of Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus Christ says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" This is not just a moral instruction. It is a profound psychological observation. What seems to us a speck in another, their outward self-confidence, unbridled creativity, desire for recognition, is often our own plank, our exiled but yearning to manifest part that we dare not see in ourselves. We project our inner conflicts onto the world, creating around us a mirror image of our own shadow. That is why deep irritation, contempt, or even irrational hatred towards certain manifestations in other people is not just a negative emotion. It is a precious, though painful, beacon. It points not to others' flaws, but to our own treasures, buried under layers of fear and shame. It calls us home, to the wholeness that was lost. But to answer this call, one must learn to recognize these beacons, to decipher their messages. For the shadow, as we have said, does not always manifest obviously. It hides in the most unexpected guises, in those types of people who evoke in us the brightest and most inexplicable reactions. When we peer into the shadowy corners of our own soul, we discover not only suppressed fears, but also unconscious projections cast upon the external world. In this daily spectacle where every passerby becomes a mirror, those who unwittingly carry our rejected shadow stand out particularly vividly. These are not necessarily villains. More often they are people whose existence, demeanor, way of speaking, or creating elicits an irrational, almost physiological revulsion in us. They are those demons who grate on our nerves, exposing our own deeply hidden prohibitions. In the gallery of these unwitting provocateurs, several figures particularly stand out. The first is undoubtedly the triumphant showman, a virtuoso of ostentatious self-confidence. He doesn't just achieve success, he proclaims it, flaunts it, as if every step he takes is a loud chord in a symphony of self-praise. His energy doesn't inspire us. On the contrary, it feels like arrogance, undisguised vanity, a desire to overshadow everyone around him. We see in him only a mask, a facade, behind which we believe lies emptiness. The irritation he causes is almost palpable. It's an itch of non-acceptance, a desire to turn away, to silence his triumphant march. We despise him for what we believe he doesn't deserve such attention, or for too openly craving what we ourselves have forbidden: recognition and visibility. The second archetype is the unruly creative, one who seems shamelessly immersed in their world of ideas, whose energy overflows, disregarding boundaries and conventions. He might be an artist whose installations seem absurd to us, a writer whose texts are too frank, or an entrepreneur whose projects are too bold and unorthodox. He doesn't seek approval, but rather follows an inner, untamed impulse. His creative freedom, perceived by us as chaos or bad taste, causes discomfort. We might call him a dilettante, an upstart, or simply weird, because his fearlessness in expressing himself exposes our own fear of judgment, our constraint in manifesting our true self. His presence is a silent reproach to our own indecisiveness, to that inner censor that holds our boldest ideas captive. And here's the story of one such encounter. Imagine Elena, a talented architect whose projects were always distinguished by elegance and functionality, but never by boldness. She worked in the shadows, preferring her work to speak for itself, without unnecessary fanfare or self-promotion. Then came Mark, a young interior designer whose work was, in Elena's opinion, flashy, extravagant, sometimes even vulgar. But Mark knew how to present himself. He organized audacious presentations. His social media was full of vibrant, sometimes ornate photos, and at every professional conference, he was the center of attention, easily and casually talking about his wildest ideas. Elena, observing him, felt not just irritation, but an almost physical nausea. How dare he, she thought. This is kitsch, not art. And why does everyone admire him so much? She saw in him the embodiment of everything she despised: superficiality, a thirst for fame, a lack of true taste. A grimace of disgust appeared on her face every time she heard his name or saw his photos. This aversion was so strong that she even avoided events where she might encounter him. Whenever Mark appeared on the horizon, Elena felt her own energy drain, as if he was sucking her life force, leaving behind only bitterness and resentment. She perceived him as a threat, as something alien that needed to be rejected. But what if these irritating figures are not just objects of our discontent, but something more? What if in every such demon, in everyone who evokes a storm of negative emotions in us, lies not only a distorted reflection, but also a key to understanding what we ourselves have forbidden? What if their seeming vices are merely the inverted side of our own unmastered strength? We name them, these shadowy figures that caused our rejection, like shards of foreign mirrors reflecting our own exiled traits. The triumphant showman, whose self-admiration seemed indecent, the unruly creative, whose freedom bordered on anarchy, and even Mark, in whose boldness Elena saw only vulgarity. But what if these demons are merely distorted masks, beneath which our most valuable, most powerful resources are hidden? Let's look at the triumphant showman, his obsessive need for recognition, his ostentatious self-confidence, his ambition. These are all facets that we painstakingly sharpened within ourselves so as not to be like him. But in this rejected figure lies something more than mere vanity. It is the untamed desire to be seen, to be heard, to assert oneself and one's right to success. It's not just a desire for praise. It's a deep need to affirm one's own worth, to manifest one's potential. By exiling this demon, we denied ourselves the right to healthy pride, to the courage to step outside the usual boundaries, to the energy needed to achieve true heights. We deprived ourselves of the ability to celebrate our victories, to accept praise without embarrassment, and most importantly, to be a source of inspiration for others, simply by shining with our presence. We locked away the leader capable of leading and the artist capable of mesmerizing. And what about the unruly creative? His unruliness, his rejection of conventions, his sometimes eccentric self-expression. This is what we suppressed within ourselves, striving for propriety, for normality. But beneath this seeming chaos lies the purest source of creative energy, an infinite capacity for play, for innovation, for self-expression without censorship. It is the freedom to be, not to seem, the freedom to explore, not to follow, the freedom to create without regard for expectations. By rejecting him, we cut ourselves off from spontaneity, from the intuitive flow, from that life-giving force that allows us to see the world with fresh eyes and create something authentically new. We denied ourselves the right to error as part of the creative process, the right to boldness of thought, the right to the joy of pure, unconditional creation. We deprived ourselves of the inner freedom necessary to be truly alive. And in Elena's example with Mark, we see the same thing. Her physical aversion to his vulgar self-promotion was merely an echo of her own suppressed desire for recognition and boldness. Mark, in her eyes, was the embodiment of what she forbade herself. The courage to claim her talent, the ability to draw attention to her ideas, the readiness to accept praise and take her place in the sun. She exiled from herself the right to visibility, to healthy assertiveness, to strategic self-promotion of herself and her ideas. Thus, every vice that we so fiercely project onto others is in reality a distorted image of our own unmastered strength, our unrealized potential. These are not demons, but angels locked in a dungeon, awaiting liberation. Each of them holds the key to our authenticity, to our vital energy, to our creativity. And as long as we keep them imprisoned, we remain only a shadow of who we could be, making decisions dictated by fear, not true desire. We have spoken of shadows, of the invisible threads that connect us to rejected parts of ourselves, of how deep irritation with others' manifestations serves as a signal to unmastered potential. But what happens when these threads remain severed, when the shadow lives its own separate, underground life? The answer is simple and harsh. It sabotages us, depriving us of authenticity, draining vital energy, and paralyzing creativity. Recall Elena, the architect whose talent was undeniable, but whose career stagnated in the shadows. She avoided publicity, seeing in it only vulgarity and self-admiration. Every time she was offered to speak at a conference, to present her work to a wider audience, she was gripped not just by stage fright, but by something much deeper. The terror of becoming like Mark, that designer whose ostentatious self-confidence she found repulsive. She feared that by daring to express herself, she would lose her purity, her intellectual modesty, becoming a caricature of what she despised. This fear kept her in a golden cage of unrealized potential. Her vital energy, instead of being directed towards creation and growth, was depleted in a constant struggle with the inner urge for visibility, for recognition. Her authentic desire for leadership and influence was buried under layers of fear. Or take the writer whose manuscripts gather dust in a drawer, his unique voice unheard. A spark lives within him, capable of igniting a whole world on pages, but he suppresses it. Why? Perhaps in childhood his vivid fantasies were called empty talk, and anyone who boldly asserted themselves was branded an upstart. He fears that his courage to be different, his unbridled imagination, will make him an unruly creative, the very archetype that in his opinion brings only chaos and rejection. And so instead of creating, he spends invaluable energy trying to silence this inner calling, turning his creative source into a dried up stream. His creativity, his authentic, unfiltered essence, remains locked away because he fears becoming the demon he himself created in his imagination, projecting onto others. Thus, a vicious cycle forms. We project onto others what we have suppressed in ourselves, and then, out of fear of becoming such a caricature, such a demon, we renounce our own qualities that could be our strength. We see only vulgarity in another's audacity, not realizing that it is a distorted reflection of our own suppressed confidence. In another's unceremonious creativity, chaos, when in reality it is our own craving for freedom of self-expression locked away behind 7 seals. Perhaps someone will object, but if I accept my shadow, won't I become that very arrogant person, that heartless careerist, that loud creative whom I so despise? This is a natural fear, deeply rooted in our collective consciousness. We are afraid that by opening the door to a dark room, we will unleash a monster. But the truth is, the shadow is not a monster, but merely energy devoid of conscious direction. It is like a wild horse. If not tamed, it can cause harm. But if tamed, it becomes a loyal ally, capable of carrying you wherever you wish. To accept the shadow does not mean to become it, but to integrate it, to take control of its power, to direct it into a constructive channel. It does not mean mindlessly expressing aggression, but rather using your inner strength to assert boundaries. It does not mean shouting about yourself at every corner, but rather allowing your true voice to be heard when necessary. It is not about becoming a showman, but about gaining the courage to be visible when your work deserves the spotlight. It is about choice, about consciously managing what previously controlled you from the subconscious. The irony is that while we so diligently fight these demons, pushing them away from ourselves, we sometimes fail to notice that other parts of us, no less valuable, remain unutilized, surrendered to those whose achievements could actually be our own. Who among us has not paused in silent admiration, observing someone's effortless grace, the art of speaking so that words turn into music, or the daring courage with which another creator challenges a blank canvas, giving birth to entire worlds from nothing. If before we spoke of the shadow that casts irritation, of those qualities that being suppressed within ourselves cause only rejection in others, today it is time to look at its brilliant opposite, the golden shadow. These are not demons whispering about our flaws, but sirens singing of another's splendor, making us forget our own. The golden shadow is a mirror reflecting not what we reject, but what we idolize. We see an ideal in someone, be it an orator whose charisma fills the space, or an artist whose brush dances on the edge of genius, or an entrepreneur whose will can move mountains, paving a path where others saw only insurmountable obstacles. And at that moment, without realizing it, we commit the subtlest yet most insidious betrayal against ourselves. We project onto them our own dormant, unrevealed gifts. We endow them with the greatness that rightfully belongs to us, but which we feared or failed to manifest, preferring the role of an enthusiastic spectator to that of an active participant. Imagine you are a talented composer, but instead of sitting down at your instrument and letting melodies pour through you, you spend years listening only to others' symphonies, admiring every chord and convincing yourself that only they possess such mastery, that your own music would be but a pale imitation. Or you are a born storyteller whose stories could ignite hearts and change the world, but you only read others' books, revering another's style, and whisper to yourself, I could never be so convincing, so vivid, so poignant. In this act of projection, in this silent worship of another's success, we don't just admire, we give away. We give them our authenticity, for our unique melody remains unplayed, our voice unheard. We give them our vital energy, which could fuel our own achievements, our passion for creation, but instead is spent on fueling another's pedestal, on maintaining the illusion of our own powerlessness. We give them our creativity, allowing our own ideas to wither in the shadow of another's brilliance, never coming to fruition. Who is this idol in your life? Whose courage, whose voice, whose ability to create evokes in you not envy, but deep, almost painful admiration? Perhaps it is someone who seems impervious to criticism, or someone who easily embodies the boldest ideas, or someone who can unite people around them by the sheer force of their presence. Look into that image. What exactly captivates you about them? Perhaps it's the effortless way they express themselves, or their fearlessness in the face of judgment, or the unbridled flow of ideas that emanates from them, transforming into tangible reality. Now ask yourself the most crucial question. Which of these qualities, which of these talents, which of these unrealized potentials have you unconsciously gifted to this person, like precious jewels that could adorn your own crown? Where, in the depths of your soul, do these very same qualities await their moment, their chance to emerge, to blossom, to shine? It is time to recognize that the gold we perceive in others is often merely a reflection of our own unrevealed richness. This is not a call for cynicism or for devaluing others' achievements. It is an invitation to take inventory, to reclaim what rightfully belongs to us. For the path to authentic power lies not only in reconciling with the parts of ourselves we have rejected, but also in reclaiming the gifts we have rashly placed on others' altars. We have already navigated the labyrinths of the self, delineating the contours of what we reject and what we worship. Now, as dawn breaks, we stand on the threshold of integration, ready to gather the scattered fragments of our being. True alchemy begins not in denying the darkness, nor in endlessly pursuing the light in others, but in the realization that every projection, be it a surge of irritation towards a showy performer, a pang of envy towards an effortlessly creative soul, or a silent awe before a charismatic leader, is merely a misplaced piece of our own magnificent complex mosaic. This is the profound philosophy I propose. To reclaim your power means to stop projecting your inner gold and perceived flaws onto the world. It means understanding that the demon you fear becoming often turns out to be a distorted reflection of your own untamed power, and the hero you worship is merely a mirror showing you the titan dormant within. We have given away too much of ourselves, not only by exiling qualities deemed unacceptable, our untamed ambition, our fierce independence, our shameless sensuality, but also by worshiping these very qualities when embodied in another. We have given our voice to the eloquent, our courage to the brave, our genius to the brilliant, contenting ourselves with the role of spectators in life's grand theater when we were meant to be the playwrights, directors, and stars of our own epic. The practical tool in this case is simple yet demands profound honesty. I call it the echo chamber of self. For 1 week, carry a small notebook or use your phone's notes app. Whenever you experience a strong emotional reaction to someone, be it intense admiration, simmering resentment, or even a subtle sense of discomfort, pause. Identify the specific quality in that person that triggers your reaction. Is it their unwavering confidence, their bold creativity, their seemingly effortless charm, or perhaps their perceived arrogance, their overt self-promotion, their emotional vulnerability? Once identified, ask yourself, where within me does this quality live, be it suppressed, unrecognized, or yearning for expression? Or how can I embody this quality in a constructive, authentic way instead of projecting it outward? This is an act of deep self-reclamation, like gathering scattered pearls. Let me offer an example. If a colleague's unbridled creativity sparks envy, instead of succumbing to comparison, ask, where is my own abandoned creative impulse? What dormant project whispers in the quiet corners of my mind? And if another's perceived arrogance triggers your disdain, consider, is there a part of me that fears its own power, its own right to stand tall and take up space, and therefore demonizes this in others? This exercise is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more fully yourself, integrating exiled parts and reclaiming projected gold. When you befriend your shadow, when you truly integrate these fragments, a remarkable transformation will occur. The world, once a battleground of external judgments and internal conflicts, becomes a vast, fertile ground for authentic self-expression. Your life energy, no longer squandered on suppression or hero worship, flows freely, fueling creativity and an unwavering sense of inner peace. You become more authentic, not because you strive for it, but because you simply are. And by embracing the full totality of your own being, you paradoxically unlock a profound capacity for accepting others, seeing them not as threats or ideals, but as fellow travelers on the path of becoming. This is not the end of the journey, but merely the beginning of a life lived with open eyes and an unburdened heart. For there is yet another layer to this unfolding, a subtle dance between our integrated self and the choices we make, the boundaries we set, and the true purpose that begins to emerge when the noise of projections finally subsides.